The clock on the wall has a second hand that moves like it's doing the work of an entire room. It ticks, then hesitates, just long enough to make you wonder if it stopped, then ticks again, stubborn and ordinary. Somewhere nearby, metal cools and creaks the way it always does when the temperature shifts. A kettle begins to murmur, not quite boiling, just complaining softly, as if it has all the time in the world to get there. A man at the table turns a pencil between his fingers, not writing, just turning it. The pencil is already blunt from being sharpened too many times. Each rotation ends with the same tiny tap against the wood, a rhythm that pretends to be harmless. Tap, turn, tap, turn. Someone folds paper. Not neatly, not badly. Just folding it the way you fold something you've already folded before. The crease is familiar. The sound is dry and thin, like a whisper you can't make out. The paper is opened again, smoothed with a palm, then folded again along the same line as if repeating it might make the message inside change. From outside, far enough away to be almost imagined, there is a low engine note. It passes, fades, leaves behind a pocket of quiet that feels too large. The quiet does not stay empty. It fills itself with other things. The faint hiss of a lamp, the scratch of a chair leg, a cough that someone tries to hide by turning it into a throat clear. A door clicks. Not opened, just settling in its frame. Someone looks at it anyway. There is a smell in the air that keeps returning no matter what else happens. Oil, damp wool, old smoke that never fully left. It sits in the back of the throat like a memory you can't swallow. A tin cup is lifted, sipped, set down. The cup makes a little ring as it meets the table, and the sound travels farther than it should. A sleeve is tugged down over a wrist, then tugged up again, then down again. An absent-minded correction that solves nothing. Fingernails pick at a seam. A button is checked, then checked again. A match is struck and held without lighting anything, its head glowing for a second before it dies. The smell of sulfur blooms and disappears. The kettle goes quiet. Someone has turned it off before it could finish. Someone always turns it off before it could finish. The second hand continues its patient circling. The minute hand seems to barely move at all, like it's waiting for permission. A voice speaks, low, measured, about something small. A missing stamp. A smudged number, whether the ink is too light. The words are ordinary on purpose, arranged carefully to keep the room from noticing what it is doing, holding its breath. Another voice answers with the same deliberate calm, the kind that belongs to people who have learned that panic is loud and useless, and silence can be mistaken for control. A laugh almost happens. It reaches the throat and turns into a sigh instead. Someone stands, not with urgency, with the slow patience of a person who has stood up 1,000 times, always for the same reasons. They cross the room and stop at a window without looking out. Their fingers touch the curtain edge, then let go. The curtain doesn't move. It stays exactly as it was, refusing to reveal anything, as if the world outside might be contagious. On the table, a small stack of papers is aligned with the table's edge, then aligned again. The corners are tapped into uniformity. The stack becomes straight. The straightness feels like a victory for about half a second. A pen cap is removed and replaced. Removed and replaced. The click is quiet, but it cuts through everything else because it is too regular, too sure of itself. Someone finally sets the pen down as if that will stop the sound from happening again in their head. The air changes slightly. Not a gust, not a draft, just a subtle pressure shift, like the room has become aware of itself. Two people glance up at the exact same moment and then look away, both pretending they were checking something else. Somewhere a radio crackles, only for an instant, then returns to silence. No message follows. The absence lands heavier than any words. A hand reaches for a watch, adjusts it by a minute, then adjusts it back. The watch is correct. The hand doesn't trust it anyway. The kettle is lifted and set back down without being poured. A cup is moved a few inches to the left. A chair is nudged closer to the table. Everything in the room shifts in tiny ways. As if by rearranging objects you can rearrange what is coming. The second hand keeps moving. And the strangest thing is how normal it all feels. How the room insists on routines. How it clings to small tasks like they are ropes over deep water. How it keeps telling itself there is still time to finish the boil, to sharpen the pencil properly, to fold the paper one last time. The clock ticks on, patient and indifferent, and somewhere beyond the walls something else is also moving. Closer, quieter, already committed. Because whatever is supposed to happen next is going to happen soon, and the room is running out of time. A name is written on a chalkboard in careful block letters, then erased and written again, as if the accuracy of the handwriting might influence the accuracy of the day. The chalk squeaks once sharply enough that a few heads lift in reflex. Then the sound is swallowed by the room's return to its practiced quiet. There are windows here, tall and narrow, dulled by grime and the constant handling of blackout coverings. The light that makes it through is thin and colorless, the kind of winter light that makes skin look paler than it is. Somewhere down the hall, a man's boots strike the floor in a steady cadence, neither hurried nor relaxed, simply obedient to distance. Each step arrives, passes, and leaves behind a short-lived echo like an aftertaste. A map is spread across a table. Not a heroic map, not a grand one, just paper, creased and softened at the folds with annotations that crowd the margins. A coffee ring stains one corner. Someone has tried to wipe it away, but the circle remains, a faint halo that refuses to be corrected. Men lean over it and talk the way men talk when the air is cold, and the war has been going on long enough to make urgency feel like superstition. Their voices stay low, not because secrecy is required, but because speaking loudly feels childish. A finger traces a river line. Another finger taps a crossroads. Someone mentions a time, then another time, and the times are close enough together to sound manageable. In the corner, a clerk sorts folders by date. He wets a thumb, separates pages, reads headings without reading meaning. His desk lamp hums. Its shade is dented. The dent has been there for weeks. Nobody cares. It still throws light. There is a smell of damp paper and wool coats drying slowly. Under it, disinfectant clings to the air in the corridors, sharp and clean in a way that feels wrong in a building that never stops absorbing smoke. On a coat rack by the door, helmets hang beside caps, and the arrangement suggests order even when it's only habit. A man enters with a bundle of messages and hands them off without ceremony. No one snatches them. No one demands. They are received, stacked, opened in sequence. Paper is unfolded, smoothed, read, then folded again. A pencil makes small marks beside certain lines, circles, underlines, the quiet punctuation of people who think they are still in control of the narrative. Outside, engines idle in the yard. The sound comes through the walls as a distant vibration, a soft, constant trembling that makes the glass in the windows quiver almost imperceptibly. Every now and then, a vehicle shifts position, gears grinding briefly before settling back into a low, steady rumble. Nothing about it sounds dramatic. It sounds like routine transport, like supplies, like movement for movement's sake. Someone laughs at something that isn't funny. It's an old joke, the kind that survives because it requires no imagination. The laughter is brief, polite, and then the room returns to the same restrained atmosphere, as if laughter is an indulgence that must be quickly paid back with seriousness. A telephone rings once and stops. Rings again. A hand lifts the receiver with practiced boredom. The voice that answers is clipped, formal, almost gentle. Yes. Understood. Repeat that. Thank you. The receiver is replaced softly, not slammed, not punctuated. Nothing in the motion suggests alarm. The man who took the call writes something down and slides the note to another man without comment. The note is read. The reader nods once. The note is set beside the map, near the coffee stain, as if it belongs to the same category of manageable inconveniences. Normality is not a piece here. Normality is a system. It is the machinery that keeps everyone from noticing how much is already decided. In another room, one you can't see but can sense through the building's shared breath, a radio operator sits with headphones pressed to his ears. His posture is careful, his spine straight. He listens to static that rises and falls like ocean surf, waiting for words to emerge. Sometimes they do, faint and fragmented, like voices speaking through water. Sometimes they don't. He keeps listening anyway, because listening is his job, and the act of listening is a comfort all its own. A runner passes through the corridor carrying a clipboard. His face is young. His expression is old. He slows at a doorway to wait for someone to finish a sentence before he knocks. Even he, moving with a message that matters, obeys the building's unspoken rule: don't break the surface. At the table, one of the men rubs his eyes and straightens his collar. Another checks his wristwatch and then checks the wall clock as if the two might disagree. The wall clock is mounted high, above the chalkboard, where everyone can see it without having to admit they're looking. The second hand keeps its indifferent march. "Still enough time," someone says, and it isn't even meant as reassurance. It's just a phrase that fills the air the way steam fills a kitchen. Inevitable, comforting, false. A paper cup of coffee sits untouched, gone cold. A cigarette burns too far down before someone notices and crushes it into an overfilled ashtray. The ashtray is cleaned every morning. It is full again by afternoon. The cycle repeats with a precision that feels almost sacred. Then, for a moment, so brief it could be mistaken for imagination, the building seems to pause. Not because something has happened, but because something fails to happen. A sound that should be there isn't. A message that should arrive doesn't. The radio operator shifts in his chair. A clerk looks up from his folders and stares at nothing for a heartbeat too long. The pause passes. Work resumes. Papers are moved. Times are spoken. Lines are traced on the map. The engine vibrations continue outside, steady as a pulse. No one names fear. No one names collapse. They speak instead of schedules, of weather, of roads, of minor delays, as if the war is a machine that can be maintained through careful attention to its parts. And all the while, beyond the walls, beyond the yard, beyond the thin winter light, something is aligning itself with quiet precision. The hands on the clock keep moving, stretching the minutes into something that feels generous. But generosity is not the same as safety. A report arrives folded the wrong way. It is a small thing, almost invisible. The paper carries the right markings, the right stamps, the right tired smell of having traveled through too many hands. But the fold is off, creased along a line that doesn't match the others. When it's opened, the corner curls upward stubbornly, refusing to lie flat. The clerk smooths it once, then twice, then gives up and reads it anyway. He reads it the way he reads everything else. Efficiently, without ceremony. Numbers, locations, a brief description that uses careful language to avoid unnecessary emphasis. He underlines one phrase, lightly, as if not wanting to insult the page. Then he places the report on the growing stack and reaches for the next one. At the map table, someone mentions that the river level seems higher than expected. It's said casually, as an observation rather than a warning. Another man nods and replies that it always looks higher this time of year. Someone else adds that the maps are probably outdated. The finger tracing the river doesn't stop. It just presses a little harder, leaving a faint smudge where the graphite digs in. A radio message comes through, partially garbled. The operator writes down what he can make out and leaves the rest blank, intending to fill it in later when the signal improves. The message is handed off with an apologetic shrug. "Interference," he says. The word interference sounds technical enough to be reassuring. Interference can be solved. Interference is not fate. Down the corridor, a door sticks when someone tries to open it. They push once, then again. A little harder this time, until the latch finally gives with a sharp metallic snap. The sound echoes longer than expected. A few heads turn. Someone mutters about maintenance. The door is left ajar, its misalignment forgotten as soon as it's no longer an obstacle. Outside, the engines change tone. Not louder, just different. A driver revs briefly, then idles again. The vibration through the walls deepens, then settles. Inside, a cup rattles against a saucer and is steadied by a hand before it can tip. The hand lingers on the porcelain for a moment too long, as if confirming that the world is still solid. A messenger arrives late, only by minutes. He explains himself quickly. Traffic, a wrong turn, a checkpoint taking longer than usual. No one questions him. Delays are expected. Delays are normal. The message he carries is read, acknowledged, filed. The lateness becomes an anecdote instead of a signal. At a side desk, a junior officer clears his throat and points to a line in a document. He says it carefully, respectfully, framing it as a question rather than a concern. "Is this number confirmed?" he asks. The man beside him glances at it and answers without irritation. "It matches the last report." The junior officer nods and says nothing more. He doesn't mention that the last report came from the same source, or that both were marked preliminary. The word preliminary feels small and harmless. He returns to his notes. The chalkboard name is erased again and replaced with another. The chalk dust settles slowly, hanging in the air for a second before drifting down. Someone sneezes. Someone else offers a handkerchief. The exchange is polite, human, grounding. The board looks clean once more, as if the act of erasing has removed uncertainty along with the name. A telephone call connects after too many rings. The voice on the other end sounds distant, strained by a bad line. A sentence has to be repeated, then another. By the time the message is understood, its urgency has been sanded down by static and patience. The listener writes it down and thanks the caller. When the receiver is placed back, it's done with care, as if roughness might damage more than the device. In a corner, the radio operator adjusts a dial and frowns. The static thickens instead of clearing. He tilts his head, presses the headphones tighter, listens harder. For a moment, a voice breaks through, thin, rushed, then vanishes. He writes what he thinks he heard, adding a question mark at the end. The question mark is small, almost shy. It does not draw attention to itself. A clock on the wall ticks steadily. The second hand jerks forward, pauses, jerks again. Someone notices that it seems to hesitate more than usual. Someone else says it's always done that. The conversation ends there. At the map, a new pencil mark is added. It's only a slight adjustment, a correction measured in millimeters. The correction shifts a line just enough to avoid a problem that no one wants to name. The mark looks clean, decisive. It gives the illusion that something has been solved. A stack of forms is returned with a note clipped to the top. The note requests clarification, not urgency, not revision, just clarification. The forms are set aside for later, placed beneath other papers that are already waiting their turn. Later feels reasonable. Later feels responsible. Outside, the light changes. Clouds pass over the sun, dimming the yard and the vehicles within it. The engines keep running. The drivers remain in place. One of them lights a cigarette and leans back against the seat, blowing smoke out the window. The smoke drifts upward and disappears into the gray air. Inside, someone remarks that the weather is turning. Another replies that it was bound to. Weather is the safest topic there is. Weather explains everything without assigning blame. A report comes in with a timestamp that doesn't quite match the others. It's off by an hour. The discrepancy is noted, then dismissed. Clocks get set wrong all the time. Time zones, daylight changes, human error. The report's contents align well enough with expectations, and expectations are powerful things. They smooth out rough edges. They make contradictions seem temporary. A man stands by the window now and actually looks out. He doesn't see anything alarming, just vehicles, mud, people moving with purpose. He watches a soldier adjust his helmet strap and slap his gloves together for warmth. The normality is almost comforting. The man turns away, satisfied. The radio crackles again. This time there's nothing underneath it, just noise. The operator removes one ear cup briefly as if giving his ear a rest, then puts it back on. He writes nothing. There's nothing to write. A conversation near the door drifts into speculation about when this phase will be over. Not with dread, with fatigue, with the quiet hope that routine will eventually give way to rest. Someone mentions a meal they're looking forward to later. Someone else nods and says the cook has been doing better lately. The talk drifts, unmoored from the documents and maps, and no one pulls it back. The room continues to function. Messages are processed. Orders are discussed without being named as such. Every small anomaly is absorbed, explained, or postponed. Nothing is large enough to force a pause. Nothing is sharp enough to cut through the fabric of habit. And beneath it all, like a hairline crack spreading through glass, the ignored details begin to align. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet patience of things that do not require belief in order to proceed. No one notices the alignment. They are too busy keeping everything else normal. Time begins to behave differently, though no one says so aloud. The wall clock seems closer now, not because it has moved, but because more eyes keep drifting toward it, and then away again. The second hand still hesitates, still pretends to falter before continuing, but the pause between its movements feels tighter, more deliberate, as if each tick is being weighed before it's allowed to exist. A new paper is brought in and placed carefully at the edge of the table, not pushed into the center, not announced. It waits there for someone to acknowledge it. The paper waits longer than it should. When it's finally picked up, it's read standing, not seated. The reader's posture subtly altered, spine straighter, shoulders set. He says nothing. He folds the paper once, precisely, and sets it down again, closer to the map this time. At the map, the men are quieter now. Not tense, just economical. Words are chosen more carefully, not because they carry danger, but because there is less room for waste. A route is discussed, then discussed again. The same details revisited from slightly different angles, as if repetition might reveal something new. It doesn't. It only confirms what everyone already believes they know. A chair scrapes softly as someone stands, crosses the room and leans over the map. His finger stops just short of touching the paper. He hovers there, suspended, then pulls back and folds his arms instead. "It should hold," he says, and the word should lands in the room with a soft, almost tender certainty. In the radio room, the operator has stopped adjusting the dials. He listens now without touching anything, hands resting on his knees, as if motion itself might interfere. The static thickens, then thins, then thickens again. A fragment of sound emerges, too short to grasp, too distorted to trust. He doesn't write it down this time. He waits to see if it returns. It doesn't. A telephone rings. This time it's answered before the second ring can finish. The voice on the line is familiar, the tone steady. Information is exchanged quickly, efficiently. There is no drama in it. When the call ends, the receiver is set down a little more firmly than before. The man who took the call exhales through his nose and rubs his jaw with his thumb. He does not look at the clock. He doesn't need to. Someone mentions that a vehicle should have reported back by now. The comment is casual, almost offhand, as if mentioning a missing glove. Another man checks a list and replies that the reporting window hasn't technically closed yet. Technically is accepted as an answer. It always is. In the corridor, footsteps approach and stop outside the door. There is a pause, long enough to register, not long enough to worry. Then the footsteps move on. A few seconds later, another set of steps follows the same pattern. The building seems to inhale and exhale with these movements, drawing sound in, releasing it. Outside, the engines begin to shut down one by one. Not all of them, just enough to change the soundscape. The constant vibration fades into pockets of silence punctuated by the cough of a cooling engine. The sudden absence of noise feels heavier than the noise itself. Inside, someone looks up sharply, then forces themselves to relax when nothing else happens. A message arrives verbally now, carried by someone who didn't have time to write it down. He delivers it standing, hands clasped behind his back, reciting details from memory. His voice is steady, but there is a faint strain in it, like a wire pulled too tight. When he finishes, he waits. No one responds immediately. The silence stretches, thin and careful, until someone nods and says, "All right." The man salutes and leaves. A pen scratches across paper, faster than before. Notes are taken with more pressure, the strokes darker, less forgiving. An eraser is used, then used again, leaving behind a smudged gray patch where certainty briefly existed and then didn't. The page is turned, as if moving forward might help. The kettle is filled again. This time it's set back on the heat without comment. No one watches it. The decision to let it boil feels oddly deliberate. At the window, the light has shifted. The sky is lower now, clouds pressing down with a quiet insistence. Movement in the yard has slowed. People cluster in small groups, talking with their hands, then breaking apart. A man points toward the road, then lowers his arm. Whatever he was indicating does not arrive. Inside, a junior officer starts to speak and stops himself. He clears his throat and begins again, softer. He frames his words carefully, wrapping them in procedure and precedent. "If there's a delay," he says, "we could consider—" He doesn't finish the sentence. The man beside him looks at him not unkindly and shakes his head once. "There's no need," he says. The junior officer nods, relief and doubt crossing his face too quickly to separate. The clock advances another minute. The movement is subtle, but several people notice it at the same time. No one comments. Time is doing what it's supposed to do. That is the problem. A paper is removed from the stack and placed face down, not discarded, just set aside. The gesture is small, almost apologetic, as if promising to return to it later. Later is still being treated as a viable concept. In the radio room, the operator finally writes something again. It's a single word, followed by a dash, followed by nothing. He stares at it for a moment, then underlines it once and pushes the paper away. He adjusts his headphones, sits straighter, and waits. Someone checks their watch and realizes they've been checking it too often. They clasp their hands together to keep from doing it again. The room feels narrower now, though nothing has changed. The air seems thicker, harder to move through. A final piece of information arrives. Not new, just confirming what has already been assumed. It slides neatly into place, completing a picture that feels stable enough to trust. The confirmation brings a brief, fragile sense of order. Shoulders loosen. A few people sit back down. This is the window. It is open, barely, quietly, like a door left ajar in a draftless hallway. Nothing forces anyone to notice it. Nothing announces itself as a last chance. There is no alarm, no raised voice, no dramatic interruption. Just the subtle alignment of moments where a different word, a different pause, a different decision might still alter the shape of what's coming. But the room is tired. The routines are familiar. The machinery of normality hums on, reliable and comforting. The kettle begins to whistle. No one reaches for it right away. The whistle fades as the kettle is lifted from the heat. The sound cuts off abruptly, leaving behind a silence that feels incomplete, as if something was meant to follow it and didn't. Water is poured into cups with steady hands. Steam rises, curls, disappears. Someone thanks no one in particular. The cups are carried back to the table and set down among papers and pencils, careful not to spill, careful not to disrupt the fragile geometry of the room. A stamp comes down on a document with a dull, final thud. It is not a dramatic sound. It does not echo, but it is heavier than the others, heavier than footsteps, heavier than voices. The ink bleeds slightly into the paper fibers, spreading in a way that cannot be undone. The stamp is lifted, inspected briefly, and set aside. The document joins a stack that has been waiting for it. No one reacts, no one needs to. The action fits perfectly within procedure. It is correct. It is clean. It is irreversible. A man straightens the stamped page and aligns it with the others, tapping the stack against the table until the edges are flush. The alignment is satisfying. It gives the impression of closure, of something finished properly. He exhales and rubs his hands together as if warming them. In the radio room, the operator hears a tone he hasn't heard before. It isn't a voice, it isn't static. It's a brief, narrow signal that slips through and vanishes before he can isolate it. He freezes, pen hovering above the paper. The signal does not return. He waits a few seconds longer than necessary, then writes nothing and removes his headphones. For the first time all day, he allows himself to stand. In the corridor, a door closes fully. Not slammed, just shut. The latch clicks into place with a soft, definitive sound. The door will not drift open again on its own. Outside, the last engine is turned off. The yard settles into an unfamiliar quiet, broken only by the distant clink of metal and the murmur of voices. People begin to move with purpose now, not rushed, not alarmed, but directed. They know where they're supposed to be next. They have been told, implicitly, without needing to be told. Inside, someone gathers their papers and tucks them under an arm. Another slips on gloves, flexes their fingers once, twice. A coat is lifted from the rack and shrugged into. The weight of it is noted, adjusted to, accepted. These are all ordinary gestures. They have been performed countless times before. That is what makes them dangerous. A junior officer hesitates near the table, holding a folder he has already checked. He opens it again anyway, scanning lines he knows by heart. There is nothing new there never was. He closes the folder slowly and presses it flat against his chest for a moment before placing it where it belongs. The moment passes. He steps back. The clock reaches a new minute. The second hand completes its circuit and begins again without ceremony. No one is watching now. They don't need to be. The schedule has moved beyond observation. A telephone rings and is silenced quickly, answered with a single word, then ended just as quickly. The exchange is efficient, almost dismissive. The call was not a question. It was a confirmation. Someone nods. Someone else responds with a nod of their own. No further discussion follows. The map remains spread out, unchanged, its lines fixed, its annotations complete. There is nothing left to add that would matter. The radio crackles faintly one last time. The operator, passing through the doorway, pauses and looks back at the equipment. He considers returning to his seat. He doesn't. He keeps walking. The building feels different now. Not tense, emptier. As if a decision has been absorbed into its walls, redistributed into beams and floors and wires. The hum of normality has shifted pitch, settling into a deeper, steadier tone. A small action has taken place. A stamp, a closure. A quiet confirmation passed from one hand to another. Nothing has exploded. Nothing has moved suddenly. Nothing has announced itself as the end of anything. But something essential has just been crossed. The line was invisible. The crossing was silent. And there is no path that leads back across it. The room grows still in a way that feels deliberate. Not empty, not abandoned. Just paused. As if everything that needed to happen inside it has already happened. And the space itself is waiting to be released from responsibility. Chairs sit where they were last used. Cups cool untouched. A pencil rolls slightly, then stops against the edge of a folder. Its movement so small it barely earns notice. Outside, the yard holds its breath. There is no engine noise now, no vibration. The absence settles over the ground like a thin layer of frost. Somewhere far off, a metal gate closes. The sound carries farther than it should, traveling through the air with nothing to interrupt it. After that, there is only the wind moving through bare branches, a dry whisper that sounds almost like distant speech if you listen too closely. Inside the building, footsteps move away down a corridor, then another set follows, then another. Each pair fades in turn, leaving behind pockets of quiet that slowly merge into something larger. Doors remain open, lights stay on. The machinery hums without purpose, continuing because no one has told it to stop. The map is still on the table. Its lines do not change. Rivers remain rivers. Roads remain roads. The pencil marks are fixed now, pressed into the paper with enough force to leave faint grooves. Even if the marks were erased, the impressions would remain. The map remembers what hands have done to it. A coat sleeve brushes against the table as someone passes, shifting the edge of a paper by a fraction. The paper slides back into place on its own, settling as if guided by habit. Order reasserts itself without effort. In the radio room, the equipment stands silent. The headphones rest where they were last placed, the ear cups touching, forming a closed circle. The chair is slightly turned, angled away from the desk. It will stay that way. No signal comes, no static. The silence is complete enough to feel intentional. A clock continues to tick. The sound is softer now, either because the room has emptied, or because attention has moved elsewhere. The second hand advances, pauses, advances again, each movement precise and unconcerned. Time has not stopped. It has simply stopped asking to be acknowledged. In a corner, a window remains uncovered just enough to show the sky. The light has flattened into a uniform gray, neither bright nor dark, a color without direction. Clouds hang low, layered and heavy, but unmoving to the eye. It is impossible to tell whether they are gathering or dispersing. The sky offers no guidance. A man stands just inside the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. He does not step forward. He does not step back. He looks into the room as if confirming something, then lets his hand fall. The doorway remains empty after he leaves. Elsewhere, beyond walls, beyond yards, beyond the reach of routine, things are in motion, not fast, not slow, simply moving as they were set to move. Tracks are followed, distances close, intervals collapse quietly, without friction, without resistance. Inside, a loose sheet of paper lifts slightly in a draft and settles again. The movement is so gentle it feels apologetic. Nothing else responds. A cup finally tips over, not dramatically, just enough to spill a thin line of water across the table. The water creeps toward the edge, meets a stack of documents and stops, absorbed by paper that was never meant to get wet. The stain spreads slowly, blooming outward in irregular shapes. No one is there to see it. The clock reaches another minute. The click as it changes is faint but final, like a switch being thrown somewhere out of sight. The sound does not echo. It does not need to. The building waits. The yard waits. The air waits. Everything holds in that narrow space where nothing has happened yet, but nothing can be prevented anymore. The moment stretches, not because it wants to, but because it is allowed to. Suspended, balanced, complete. And just beyond this stillness, Just past the last ordinary second, something irreversible is already arriving. The clock keeps ticking, and then the sound seems to stop just before the next tick.